Are you hoping to get one of the rarest titles in the game? Or perhaps wanting to farm some of these glorious weapon glams? Or perhaps looking for challenging content you can do alone, even on a free trial? If so, you might be interested in the Palace of the Dead. This rather unique side content can keep you busy for as long as you wish, even if you're playing this MMO all alone.
If you're extremely new to the Deep Dungeon system,
or wish to learn details about how it functions, I recommend you first watch my Ultimate Deep Dungeon Starter Guide, linked in the description. If you're here to learn how to progress Palace of the Dead floors 61 to 200 solo, you're in the right place. This guide is going to help you understand how to best approach Palace solo progression, covering each different floor set through the lens of 5 different roles: tank, physical range, caster, melee, and a healer. I'll be using jobs that are typically most recommended starter jobs by the Deep Dungeon community, each in their respective category. These jobs are Warrior, Machinist, Pictomancer, Reaper, and Sage. However, if you wish to run this content on any other job, that is totally possible, and hopefully the tips I cover for the role will prove useful to you as well. Here's an overview of what this guide covers, and don't forget to use the timestamp to jump around as you need. Chapter 1 briefly explains when and why would you want to start your climb from floor 1 opposed to floor 51. It also covers Palace-specific special enemies and commanders, as well as some tips on how to best prepare to progress Palace solo. Chapter 2 covers floors 61 to 130. These floors are chunked together because they are very similar in complexity, but timestamps from the pinned comment will help you find specific bosses or floor sets in this range. I'll be covering which enemies you need to be mindful of, as well as each of the boss mechanics. Chapters 3 to 10 will cover each of the floor sets individually from floor 131 to 200. These will go into much more detail than the floors covered in Chapter 1, additionally focusing on the job differences, time management, and commander strategies. Chapter 5 specifically covers some details
unique to the room layouts on floors 151 to 200,
so don't skip that one. If you're interested in the Necromancer achievement specifically, you'll need to start your file at floor 1 each time, once you're ready to progress to the end. If you start from floor 51, you can still reach floor 200 and get a clear reward, but you won't get that specific title achievement. Usually, my advice is to start from 51 a few times, just to get more practice quickly at later floors, and when you feel ready to more consistently progress floors 171 and higher, consider starting from floor 1. At that point, your Aether Pool should be maxed,
and you shouldn't have any issues getting 1 to 50
done in about an hour and a half each time. This guide will only cover floors 61 plus, assuming you've already familiarized with the earlier floors from your unlock journey. Every deep dungeon shares the majority of commander pool, but they each have 3 commanders that are unique. For Palace, these 3 commanders are what we call the transformation commanders: Rage, Lust, and Resolution. Rage will one-shot every enemy you hit, and the effect lasts for 60 seconds.
Strangely enough, it works by knocking enemies away,
so a no knockback floor enchantment will cancel out this insta-kill ability. Rage cannot be used to one-shot bosses.
Lust allows you to use an AoE cast
that also applies up to 5 vulnerability stacks to the enemies it hits. This vulnerability lasts for 90 seconds, and it can shave off up to 2 minutes worth of time fighting on some of the later bosses. It can also be a useful tool to AoE groups of enemies down more quickly than what you would do with your regular AoE abilities. Resolution
allows you to use a targeting AoE
that applies holy damage and stun for up to 5 seconds. Enemies that are normally immune to stun remain immune to this stun. Certain monsters fall into the undead category in Palace, and Resolution can kill them in 1 to 3 shots without negative floor enchantments, depending on the floor set. Gloom and Pox on the highest floors can make this go up to 4 or 5 shots. In the character configuration menu, ground targeting setting, you'll find helpful options to press action twice to execute. You can also fix the targeting circle to max range, which can be helpful when you want to add some consistency to your target range, especially on controller. Blind enchantment does not affect any of the transformation commanders.
You'll always hit enemies regardless of the debuff.
While transformed, you cannot open gold or silver chests.
You're also not immune to most traps,
though they affect transformations in different ways.
You can use the exit though,
so sometimes this allows you to double dip some kills into the next floor, especially useful while using a rage. You can wait out the transformation to drop off naturally, or drop out of it yourself by either clicking off the buff from your buff list or by using a macro you can put in your hotbar. Macro is on the screen right now.
In any of the floor sets that will be covered,
sometimes rarely you will find enemies that are special to Palace. They are all NPCs that died somewhere in the Realm Reborn story, and they have unique names. All of these are the same when it comes to fighting them. Everything they do is an auto attack. They have no other abilities. This can make them dangerous on later floors,
or when our Aether Pool isn't high enough to survive being hit often.
All of them are immune to witching, they have proximity aggro, and all of them are weak to resolution as they are considered undead, but none are stunnable.
Since the patch 7.31 update, regular enemy kills have been dropping sustaining potions, which can also be gained by exchanging Gilmoran Potshers to this NPC in Quarry Mill. You'll want to have at least 300 of these for a full run of Palace. They are very valuable for survivability, so don't forget to put them on your hotbar, and don't hesitate to use them on bosses and on any floor set with debuffs or while you're unfamiliar with the incoming damage.
Max potions you've been getting from Palace are going to be a great addition to your defensive rotation. Super potions, hyper potions, and any newer varieties aren't necessary here, as your level is synced to 60, so the amount that you can heal is capped, and all of these heal you for very similar values. You could have a few of these better potions specifically for the 180 boss Behemoth, as even a little bit of a healing edge can help there. Other than potions, it's worth having some food on hand and popping it before each floor set to ensure you have some extra HP inside. The food doesn't have to be the newest either. I usually use the previous expansion's raid food because it's cheaper to make or buy. As for the food buff stats, Heavensward content did not have direct hit applied to it, so adding food with a direct hit chance is not a bad idea to get any chance of a direct hit inside Palace. Remember, the most important thing is that extra bit of HP you get from vitality on any food. You may want to prepare some tinctures as well. Healers can use tinctures of mind a lot to speed up their outgoing damage on the floors themselves. Other jobs usually only use tinctures during the bosses if they can maintain their HP otherwise, considering that the tincture puts your potion on cooldown for a longer time. The 180 boss Behemoth may even require a tincture for the enrage push depending on the job. In this guide, only Pictomancer will be using a tincture strategy, so if you're going as a Picto, prepare some tinctures of intelligence. There are a few different macros you can prepare in your macro inventory and set them on your hotbar to help with Palace progression. They'll be shown on screen as I'm speaking, and there is also a document linked in the description where you can copy them from. The first is a macro that gets you out of rage, lust, or resolution transformation without having to wait it out or click off the debuff, which I've mentioned a bit earlier. This can be extremely helpful when you need to drop the transformation sooner for healing purposes. The second macro is the one that allows you to remove the food buff by not having to click it off, so you can set this to your hotbar. The next two macros are warrior specific. The first one allows you to use home gang, your invulnerability, by targeting yourself. It's extremely useful during landmine plays and just in general Final Fantasy XIV gameplay, allowing you to not get chained to a specific enemy when needing to protect yourself. The second warrior specific macro is to use Thrill of Battle, only to automatically turn it off after 2 seconds. This allows you to use Thrill as a healing tool alone and is extremely helpful during the Behemoth boss enrage. If you don't want to use this macro, you'll need to manually click off the Thrill buff during the Behemoth push, which many people consider a safer strategy, but I find it to be an additional stressful step to add into the mix. Ultimately, it's your choice. Oh, and finally, you can prepare this macro to set yourself the Necromancer title once you get your clear,
while still inside the dungeon.
When it comes to the HUD layout, you can help yourself by splitting the buff window into sections and making this part larger and more centered somewhere on the screen, where you'll be able to easily notice them. This will show you floor buffs and debuffs, Hawk's status, and other vulnerabilities you're currently enduring. You can also place Howling Fist or Feint on a shared hotbar somewhere, so you can check the aggro range for sight and proximity enemies. Their range is about 9.5 yalms, while these skills have 10 yalm range, so as long as they have a little X marker on them, you are out of range. As soon as the X disappears, this means a step forward
will aggro the enemy.
If you wish, you can also adapt one of your chat windows to show only floor enchantments, notices of time you enter the floor, and enemy status effects. To do that, copy settings you see on the screen. Even though I'll be getting into more and more specifics as we go through the guide, there are some general gameplay tips I can give you for playing Palace of the Dead better. Try to keep these in mind as you go through any of the sets, but especially the later ones. Crowd control. All of the jobs have some form of crowd control abilities, such as sleep, stun, interject, leg graze, arm's length, feint, etc. Learn what your job of choice has to offer in this regard and use those abilities often. These abilities may not be useful in most of the other Final Fantasy XIV content, but they sure are useful here. Any extra mitigation you can achieve is going to help you long term. Stagger defensives. Don't use all of your defensives at once. For example, you can open with a sprint and at the end of its duration, pop a leg graze to slow down the enemy. Roll out your crowd control and shield abilities out in waves, so you can cover most of the difficult fights better. Plan ahead. The further you go in, the more important
Time management becomes.
Try to think about what you're going to pull and where you're going to go next while you're still in combat. The less time you spend only moving around and thinking, the better you'll manage the overall floor set timer.
Chests are almost always worth opening. In general, you need items to clear,
and opening chests will get you those items. Avoiding chests in fear of mimics
is usually a bad idea.
Try to open the chest before the key opens, and be really careful with any decisions regarding opening more chests after it does. Every mimic you get can be a few minutes of lost time, so if that time is crucial to you, don't risk it if the key is already open. Before you open any chest, have a plan on how to deal with the potential mimic. If you have no idea how you'd manage it, best to not risk it. Be wary of your time. Leaving the 6th floor of a set with 30 or more minutes left on your timer usually means you're going at a comfortable pace,
and you shouldn't worry about time too much.
Most bosses require around 8 to 10 minutes, so don't lose track of time and use some time-saving items occasionally. It is often a good idea to use time-saving items earlier in the floor set so you have more room to make non-forced decisions later. Try to remember enemy aggro types. Knowing if an enemy notices you via sight, sound, or proximity helps a lot. It's worth checking the DDCompendium before each floor set while you're learning this, just as a reminder. Knowing what you can avoid and what you can't will help you plan ahead and prioritize enemies on the floors better. Keep an eye on enemy movement. It is always worth keeping your eye on your surroundings, making sure no patrol is about to approach and surprise you. Enemies inside the rooms will usually move every 10 to 30 seconds, and in many cases they will fully turn around to move in the opposite direction from where they were facing. If an enemy is blocking your way out, you can give it some time
to move before running into the room to fight it.
If the enemy starts turning as you're walking by, sometimes it's possible to avoid side aggro with a quick readjustment of your own movement, so never stop
keeping an eye on the enemies around you.
Hiding and slide casting. If enemies are unable to hit you, naturally you'll be able to survive longer. Hiding means keeping distance from the enemy, for they waste time following you instead of auto-attacking you all the time. Jobs that are great with movement can do this easily in most floor sets.
To kite with physical range jobs, practice running around the edges of the room and pausing only when the enemy is casting. In limited spaces or when fighting monsters that are difficult to kite due to their tonal AoEs, kiting works best in middle distance. Run around the enemy just outside of the range and run behind the enemy when they're casting. This forces them to turn around and to skip a few auto attacks. On non-physical range jobs, this middle range kiting can be really useful as well.
For casters and healers and even melee jobs, some amount of kiting is possible if you can utilize slide casting well. In Final Fantasy XIV, whenever your cast is about to hit the last 30% of the cast bar, you're able to move without canceling the cast. This is called slide casting, and you can use any emote icon to help you practice the right timing, as the emote will light up
when you're ready to move.
The law of diminishing returns. For many debuffs enemies can apply to you and you to enemies, it's worth knowing that they're becoming less effective each time they consecutively appear. You likely noticed, on some floors where enemies can paralyze you or slow you, you can plan to pull multiple of the same enemies in a row, so you use diminishing returns effect to your advantage. You also need to be careful when you're using something like sleep in a prolonged fight.
That sleep will get shorter in duration each time.
Legacy movement. In Final Fantasy XIV, we have standard and legacy camera options available. While standard movement is fine for deep dungeon, if you're planning on using a ranged job, it's heavily advised to use legacy camera. You need to be able to move camera around you, check for patrols, and plan where to go next. If using standard, consider this when choosing your job. Landmine traps appear on some floors more frequently, allowing us to potentially utilize them to our advantage. Tanks and healers can benefit from this the most, as you can help yourself with vulnerabilities and shields. I'll be mentioning potential landmine plays in the later sections of this guide when relevant. While landmine plays aren't mandatory to learn for clearing, tanks and healers struggle with
time management without them.
so it's worth practicing this on lower floors and trying it out. The general idea is gather a bunch of enemies and kite them towards a visible landmine you've uncovered with sight. Usually you want at least 7 to 8 monsters, as this is the average amount of enemies needed to unlock the key forward, but you can also do several smaller landmine plays to save time if there are more landmines available on the floor. Move around the room in a wider circle to mitigate some of the damage and to make sure that every enemy is gathered close by. For safety reasons, you'll then use a witching. Make sure you have a steel and a strength active to reduce the incoming damage and ensure you do enough damage to the monsters to finish them off after the landmine explosion. Pop some shields or invulnerability, prepare another shield, and use it as you step into a trap. Move away from the enemies briefly, pop a potion of some kind or a heal, and start AoEing the monsters. Since this is scary and requires some practice, it is recommended to not do this without a raising active. I have linked some extra guides in the description that can help as additional learning material. These floor sets are generally a bit mindless and spongy in places. There are very few things you need to worry about in this floor range. If anything, you need to worry about finding a good podcast to listen to on the side. The path ahead of you is long, so don't hesitate to use your commanders generously during these floor sets. I advise keeping to a few rules. Try to keep at least 1 or 2 of almost every commander at all times, while not being shy of using them often overall. Using your third rage or flight can help you speed up time and avoid overcaps later in the floor set.
As an exception, I'd advise
Keeping raising and serenity at 3 whenever possible. If you're dealing with a nasty debuff combination, use a serenity of course, but it is good to get into a habit of being a bit stingy with them. If it is your very first time climbing up, you can pop a raising a bit more often, but generally try to keep these capped for later floors. Raising fully stops dropping after floor 181, so it's worth having it capped at that point. Try to have a steel and a strength ready for every boss, especially while your Aether Pool is not capped. Doesn't matter if your inventory drops to 1 of each after the boss, you'll get them back. They drop relatively often. Specifically for this floor set range, 51 to 130, keep 2 resolutions for the floor 100 boss. It can be done with 1, but having 2 is a nice safety net. Lusts can be useful on floor 120 and 130 bosses, though they are far from necessary.
you've likely done 51 to 60
many times during your Aether Pool grind, so the layout here should be familiar. There isn't anything too dangerous on this set other than some wall traps, so always fight from the hallways. Use your fortunes and affluences generously to start collecting items for the next set, and whenever you cap something useful at 3, feel free to use it to speed up. Floors 61 to 70 are keeping the same layout and the same trap locations, so the same care applies. Always fight from the hallways. Vipers and Triceratops are the only enemies who hit quite hard, and their proximity aggro is to be taken with special caution. If you pull more than one, consider steal or witching, or sleeping one of them if you are on a caster or a healer. Palace Ebbs, a patrol, can also hit hard and make you more vulnerable to damage for 10 seconds, so be mindful not to pull too many at once. The boss, Yaguaru, is mechanically very simple. Whenever it casts Douse, move away about a quarter of the arena so that the boss follows you out of his puddle. Once this puddle is down, it wouldn't damage you if you walk over it, but it applies haste to the boss, so you don't want him to sit inside. Avoid electrogenesis if your Aether Pool isn't maxed, otherwise this isn't too dangerous. He'll occasionally put a heavy on you, which will be 15 seconds long at first, but later it gets shorter and shorter. Hit sprint when it uses drench attack during that long heavy window, so you can escape next electrogenesis safely. Floors 71 to 80 also keep the same layout as the previous two sets. Enemies here start hitting a bit harder, but are generally fine to deal with as long as you don't step into any telegraphs. Be mindful that you do not pull monkeys while they have their banana buff on, which they apply occasionally out of combat. Also, be careful of fighting Anzu patrols when low on HP, as they have a specific stun attack they start using then. There are even some reports that Anzu's jump can hit through tanks and vulnerability. The boss, boss, Behemoth, is doing a lot more casts in comparison to the previous two bosses, so he's a bit easier to manage in terms of self-sustainability. Start off by baiting the first Charybdis where you entered. This leaves behind a tornado, which has a bit of a wider range than the cast itself,
so move a few steps away from it when it drops.
Thunderbolt is a conal you can easily avoid if you're staying at about max melee range to the boss. At specific points in the rotation, this Behemoth will travel directly west or directly east to do a large conal attack called Trounce. You want to keep close, following along with the boss to easily avoid this. The rotation he does is very repetitive and is on the screen right now. Generally, keep west and east safe from Charybdis tornadoes and keep repeating the same movements until he hits 10% HP. Then he will start casting Meteor, which hits you for 80% of maximum HP if the cast goes off, so make sure to be healed and use this time to damage him. After this, he goes back to his normal rotation. The room visuals now change, and with them the trap layouts. There are far fewer wall traps around now, so you should be hitting accidental traps less often while moving around. Try to avoid stepping into the left side of the rooms that are uphill when there are enemies around, as there can be wall traps there. Otherwise you should be okay hugging the walls. On this floor set, bombs can be a bit dangerous with low aether pool, as they use self-destruct some 35 seconds into the fight. This takes away 70% of your max HP, so if you're very slow at damaging them, try to keep your health maxed or use a witching if you pull too many bombs. Flame dragons sometimes toss AoEs out of combat, so be mindful that you move from any AoE you see, because it might not be coming from an enemy you're fighting at the moment. Claws are a bit annoying as they can draw you in, making them dangerous to fight inside trapped rooms and with other enemies around. If there is a no knockback enchantment on the floor, this draw-in effect won't work, so it makes the claws much more comfortable to fight. This boss is the first one for a while that has mechanics to keep in mind. The rotation is very stable. Most notably, Godmother often summons several types of bombs: the lava bombs, the grey bomb, and the giddy bomb. The grey bomb, which is actually orange, should be killed as soon as possible, as it does a big 80% of max HP raid-wide if its cast goes off. Little lava bombs simply need to be avoided, don't get caught in their small AoEs. Giddy bomb cannot be damaged, only moved around when you attack it. You want Giddy Bomb to be touching Godmother's hitbox because it will stun and prevent her from doing a massive burst. If this isn't prevented, it does damage equal to 99% of your max HP, so it can theoretically be survived, but it's best avoided. If you need to align the bomb, quickly move behind it and use an auto attack to push it under the boss. Be very careful not to use any AoEs once it's in position, to accidentally move it away. If this happens and you don't have time to fix the situation, move as far as possible away from the boss and prepare to use a potion right after massive burst goes off. If you have a shield of some kind, you can use it too. Just like on the last floor set, try to avoid stepping into the left side of the rooms that are uphill when there are enemies around, and you should be okay hugging the walls here. Many enemies on this floor set have proximity aggro, so moving through rooms with mobs around can be dangerous. This is where you first start feeling the bump in incoming damage. Your damage output will slow down, and you should respect enemies quite a bit more than before, especially if your aether pool isn't maxed. On this floor set, many enemies are undead and can quickly be killed by using a resolution. However, you should also keep at least 2 resolutions for the boss, so don't overspend them. The overlay shows which enemies are undead and which are not. All of the patrols are somewhat dangerous if they catch you off guard, so keep an eye on them. Wraiths don't hit hard, but they are proximity aggro, so they can be difficult to avoid. They do a massive AoE called Scream, which should be avoided, so you should plan to have enough room to move around when you pull one. Iron Courses and Gravekeepers can hit quite hard, but Gravekeepers can at least be avoided because of their sound aggro. Consider popping a Steel if you have to fight many of these, and keep those potions and sustaining abilities rolling. For this boss, have a Strength and a Steel ready. It is useful having a Lust, but not necessary. It is almost a necessity to have 1 to 2 resolutions, even though the boss can be done without them, it's just much more difficult that way. The boss will summon adds 3 times in the fight, at approximately 90%, 65%, and 40% health. These enemies can be killed with a few hits of Lust or just normal job actions, but their corpses will remain on the battlefield and occasionally reanimate unless they are hit with resolution. The common strategy is to use the lust for the first wave of mobs, then use resolutions for the second and the third waves of mobs, clearing them all out. Be super mindful of AoEs. You do not want to get hit by Doom at all, and getting hit by other things will make it significantly harder to survive. Always stay close to the boss, and while in resolution or lust, ideally have a sustaining potion ticking. Once the third set of ads is gone, the boss will do his simple rotation till the end. The hard part is done. If you only have one resolution, use regular job abilities to AoE down the first ad spawns, lust to get rid of the second spawns and the respawns around it, and then use resolution at about 45% boss HP to get rid of the corpses currently around and the final ad spawns, which happen at about 40% HP. If you're looking for your level 100 scorecard achievement, you will get it once you finalize your save file, by either clearing Palace fully or by dying somewhere permanently within the next 100 floors. Technically, you can zone into floor 101, die, get your achievement if this is all you care about. From now on, you cannot proceed to the next floor set if your save file shows KO equals 1, or in other words, if you got a duty failed notification somewhere during the previous set. The floor layout still stays the same, so be careful of traps on the left walls in the uphill dead-end rooms. Generally, keep fighting in the hallways, cause some enemies can hit quite hard if you pull them in combination with others. On this floor set, the most notable enemy to be mindful of is the Hornet. It casts Final Sting about 20 seconds into the fight, which will do 99% of your max HP and kill itself. You can outrun this if your DPS is too low, though with Aether Pool over 75 through 80, as I suggested earlier, these shouldn't pose an issue. You can also stun them or witching them if you panic. Patrols, Goblin Adventurers, and Dung Beetles can hit quite hard, so be wary of accidentally pulling more than one. The Beetle's Rhino attack can still be avoided by line of sighting it behind the wall, just like in its earlier iteration. Another tricky enemy is a Squirrel. It will haste their auto attacks and do more damage than you probably expect. This haste can be cancelled out with arm's length, but it will reapply it soon after. This boss is probably the easiest boss ever. It is
Pretty much exactly the same as the boss on floor 10, just hits a bit harder.
Avoid AoEs, use sustaining abilities or potions during the damage over time window, and that's pretty much it. If the damage seems high, feel free to use a steal, but not even that should be required. From now on, you'll be spending some time in these yellow caves, which do happen to have quite a few wall traps around. Most of them are in dead-end rooms and the donut rooms, but to be safe, always fight from the hallways and never walk through the room with other enemies close by. On floors 111 to 120, be extra careful of Gigantoads, Slimes, and Cobras. If it's your first time here, it is actually not a bad idea to use a raising to accommodate for your lack of experience while learning the gimmicks of these three monsters. Gigantoads will do a quick sticky tongue ability, which will stun you if you're not facing it. So always face Gigantoad when fighting it. Immediately after, get away from an AoE around it. If you're stunned, this will hurt a lot. Having Steel on will allow you to survive this mistake if you had one before the stun happened. Slimes enrage about 35 seconds into the pull, just blowing you up, so be careful not to pull too many at once. Focus them first, or witching if you happen to hit alluring traps with a few of them. They are sound aggro, so they can usually be avoided. Speaking of traps, be extra mindful to not step into a toad trap while on this set. A Cobra Patrol will eat you and one-shot you if it spots that you're a toad. Additionally, when you pull a Marble, stay very close to it so you can immediately avoid its bad breath when you get out of the inevitable sleep status. Seedlings can be dangerous to pull with other things, as they put a stacking poison on you, but they can be easily avoided because of their sound aggro. On floors 121 to 130, there aren't many dangers. Vivers hurt a lot, and Spriggans can take you by surprise with their fast boulder circle AoE, which they also use out of combat. Move out of any yellow you see, and you should be fine. Be mindful of the Minotaur patrols. You'll need to move away from their untelegraphed 111-ton swing, so leave yourself enough room to dodge it without pulling something else. As for the bosses, the boss on floor 120 is the same as its level 20 version, and it might even be easier at this point because you have a higher ether pool than before. Focus on the bees each time they spawn before they do their final stings. Prepare for some healing after a leaf storm, and don't step into any telegraphed AoEs. If your damage seems low, focus one of the bees down first, as a single final sting shouldn't finish you off even if it goes off. You can also use a witching to save yourself in emergencies. The boss on floor 130 is the same as its level 30 version, just faster. The best way to deal with it is to move in circles around its hitbox so you can easily step into the hitbox when fear itself gets cast. This will require some sustainability, but if you have trouble keeping yourself alive, you can do a lot of kiting on the outer edge of the arena and reduce a lot of the incoming damage. Just remember that the boss will immediately go to the middle after the second ice puddle each rotation. Welcome to the White Caves, where the wall traps become much more common and the enemies hit significantly harder than before. Specifically, dead-end rooms and donut rooms are very littered with wall traps. Pillar rooms are also quite dangerous. Ideally, you want your aether pool to be capped. You want to save a strength, a steel, and one resolution for the boss if possible. On this floor set, the general incoming damage of enemies gets higher, so have your potions at the ready. Be more careful of the no item debuff if you're on a job with low sustainability. Respawn rate here is 1.5 minutes, which is still quick, and for this reason it is not recommended to be fighting inside enemy rooms to avoid getting a potential respawn on top of you. The Ahriman patrol will do a level 5 death occasionally, which is a small untelegraphed conal gaze attack. You want to move behind the enemy or look away, otherwise you'll instantly die. The Toblapus patrols also have a gaze attack you need to respect, but then also prepare to move immediately after it to avoid the creepy Jetatura AoE. If the gaze hits you, you'll get minimized, which you can cancel out by using any of the transformation commanders. The Hucks are simply annoying, as they inflict a 30-second log disease on you, which slows you down, but it can be Asuna'd if you're on a healer. You can also use any shield to prevent from getting it. Gourmands hit you with harsh auto attacks, so beware not to pull more than one at a time. The majority of enemies are stunnable here, so melees and tanks can have a nice time managing incoming damage this way. Physical range jobs and casters can get away with avoiding a lot of damage, as most of the enemies on this set are kiteable. Only be mindful of monks, as they only do ranged auto attacks and pull-in mechanic that could pull you into a trap if you're not careful. The layout of the floor doesn't help kiting, however, so try to use your initial room as much as possible and practice running in smaller circles in the hallways. As a healer, you can get away with multipling the souls, mummies, and troubadours, 2 or 3 at a time, more if you have a steal. Provided that you'll keep resolution for the boss, you don't need to worry about saving time too much, just play it carefully. If you do need to save time and have extra resolutions, you could use it to kill some undead enemies present on this floor set: ghosts, gourmands, or mummies. This boss is the quickest boss Palace has to offer once you know how to deal with it. It is pretty much the same as its level 40 version, but this time you can have resolution to deal with it, since he's listed as an undead. Pop a strength and a steel, then come closer to him. Use a sustaining potion and then resolution. You want to hit it 3 times. Then move, hit 2, move, hit 3, move, and then keep avoiding the AoEs and hitting him when possible. If done correctly, it should be dead within less than a minute. If you think you won't kill it in time because your HP is low because you got hit too much, use the resolution to finish off the ghost before you drop from it to heal. Then finish the boss off normally. If you don't have a resolution at all, prepare for a much longer fight. Focus down the ghost when they spawn, otherwise Scream will kill you. Just like the previous set, be extremely careful of wall traps in this one. Specifically, dead-end rooms and donut rooms, as well as pillar rooms, are very littered with them. Be prepared for the higher incoming damage from enemies. Have your potions at the ready. Be much more careful on the no item debuff if you're on a job with low sustainability, especially if you have no room to kite. Gargoyles are very common in the early floors, and I wouldn't hesitate to pop a steal before fighting a bunch of these. They put a poison on you and then do a decently heavy hitting 10 buster, so keep your potions rolling. They are stunnable, which can be helpful as a mitigation tool on jobs that have a stun. Just like on the earlier floors, Manticore does a Ripper Claw, which you have to respect. It's an untelegraphed frontal conal, so don't stand in front of him. Succubus will put AoEs on you out of combat, so move out of any AoE you see. Don't trust that it's from the enemy you're fighting. If you're fighting a Succubus, don't get hit by Dark Mist. Hal's demons cast Enrage in a form of Charybdis, which take 90% of your max HP after about 30 seconds, so be careful of it on low DPS jobs. It is worth mentioning that this cast cannot be avoided with line of sight. All of the enemies except for Onyx Dragons and Keepers are stunnable, so utilize that as a melee or a tank. As a healer, you can easily multiple boots and Keds. They generally do lower damage. Pull 2 without steel, up to 4 or 5 with steel, whatever is comfortable. Healers also have an easier time with gargoyles and enemies that put paralyze on you, as these can be Asuna'd. Physical ranged will have the easiest time on this set, provided that you have some room to kite. In very nasty rooms, especially if it's a donut room, don't hesitate to use a sight or a safety to ensure you can manage the incoming damage by moving around. This boss is the only boss above floor 100 that is significantly different from its earlier counterpart. Sadly, it's quite annoying and can take anywhere between 7 to 15 minutes on different jobs, but it is not a mechanically difficult boss. Other than doing many AoEs, it will take turns summoning these slow walking ads and a bigger succubus ad. The mummies will root you if they catch you, making you unable to move, which can be dangerous if it happens in unison with Dark Mist AoE. The succubus ad will do some damage to you while she's around, but will get eaten by the boss a few mechanics later, and restore boss's HP by a maximum of 15%, depending on how much HP the succubus ad had left. This is simply prolonging the fight. You'll be at the net positive as long as you're doing over 15% damage in about 1 minute and 50 seconds. This boss doesn't require a steal, but having one will help you manage HP a lot better after the Blood Rain raid-wide. Without a steal, this does a lot of damage. I suggest using a steal here unless you're very comfortable with the fight's rotation. As a physical ranged, it is generally recommended to simply kite the boss and move around the edges of the arena to ignore the mummies. Mummies get destroyed when the Blood Rain AoE happens, so they don't pose you a long-term threat. When a succubus appears, physical range can choose to attack it a few times or fully ignore it and focus on the boss. The boss will take you about 5 minutes with strength, 7 minutes without. As a tank, you can stay in the middle of the arena and AoE down the mummies when they reach you. You can safely tank Voidfire 4, just gotta make sure to kill the mummies before the Dark Mist. Alternatively, you can ignore the mummies and carefully kite the boss around the edges of the arena if you find it to be more comfortable. Definitely use a strength during this boss. When a succubus spawns, the tank can choose to attack it a few times or fully ignore it and focus on the boss. The boss will take you about 8 minutes with strength, less if you lust at any point as well. As a melee or a caster, it is best to kite and ignore the mummies. Red Mage is the exception here, as the mummies are weak to wind, so Red Mage can one-shot each with a quick cast of a Rairo. Steel is heavily recommended. Respect Dark Mist and move from it as soon as possible. Feel free to ignore the succubus ad and fully focus on the boss. The boss will take you about 5 minutes with strength, 7 without. As a healer, it is best to kite and ignore the mummies. White Mage is the exception here, as a size with strength will one-shot all of the mummies due to its wind aspect. Respect Dark Mist and move from it as soon as possible. When the succubus comes, put a dot on it and try to use AoE, as healers have a DPS gain if they hit 2 targets. In this case, the boss and the succubus. The boss will take you about 9 minutes with strength, while without on Sage. You can speed up the fight by using a lust during some succubus windows, trying to get as many hits as possible to both the boss and the succubus. The succubus is also vulnerable to rage, which can be used in dire emergencies.
Finally, welcome to the pretty floors.
These floors have a layout that's much more open and recognizable than any of the previous sets, making it easier to remember specific rooms with nasty traps. Fortunately, there aren't too many. There are 4 rooms to keep in mind, 3 of them being dead-end rooms and 1 with this side wall. The specific dead-end rooms that are troublesome are the one with square-filled wall, which we often call the boombox room, the so-called Stonehenge room with these 4 pillars and a small circle staircase stage in the middle, and this uphill room which has no box walls but is neighboring the so-called danger room with the wall. The danger room has a wall trap very close to this wall you're very likely to want to pass by. Also, there's a trap very close to this corner of the room which can be avoided by tightly hugging the wall. There are a few other similarly walled rooms, but there isn't so much snow in the middle or boxes in the sky. Those different wall rooms tend to be safe. Also, remember that this room can actually be cut off in different ways, making it look like a corner room sometimes. Until you're sure how to recognize these tricky rooms, the best option is to avoid entering any dead-end rooms through the right corner and to avoid all wall sections. Other than these examples, tightly hugging any wall should be safe. I do have to highlight tightly. Some traps can still be hit if you're roaming near the wall, but not exactly hug it tightly. Armanda has a very detailed trap guide for these floor sets with many more details if you're interested. Check it out, even though this knowledge isn't necessary for the clear, but the guide is absolutely amazing. From now on, the guide will be detailing more tips about specific jobs and giving commander usage advice and strategies you can use. Remember, I'll be using Machinist, Warrior, Reaper, Necromancer, and Sage for the role-specific tips, but much of this can be applied to other similar jobs. Note, however, that you cannot clear Palace with a clear plan written ahead of time. This content constantly changes, so you'll have to adapt to the conditions you get. Some strategies are utilized more often than others, but that doesn't mean they're necessarily correct for your situation or that this is the only way to do things. Use these notes as a starting point and as general ideas, but don't be afraid of tweaking your own decisions when you feel something else is right for you to do. Enjoy the discovery process. We're just about ready to start explaining the next floor sets, but I'll first cover some job-specific tips. Job specifics I'm gonna go through are meant to be kept in mind throughout the entirety of 150 to 200, though they become more important the further you go in. I'll be mentioning more in-depth situations during the individual floor sets too, but those should always be combined with the general specifics listed here. Let's first tackle Machinist. Kiting is your biggest strength, and not much can stop you as long as you have room to kite the enemies and not let them reach you. You can keep bringing monsters to your starting room if needed, or hug the walls tightly while running around. For harder monsters, using a sprint on pre-pull will give you a full duration of 20 seconds, after which you can usually follow it up with leg raise to further slow the enemy down. Some monsters will be invulnerable to heavy, but many are not. Always try leg graze, arm's length, or foot graze on enemies to see if they can be affected if you forgot to check before the set begins. Consider Serenity if you're dealing with a blind plus no item situation or a no ability plus gloom. Sometimes you'll be able to fight a regular no item floor, provided that you don't forget to interrupt box at any time and that you have room to kite. For you, the biggest hurdle will be the monsters who do ranged attacks and heavy damage over time effect, so you'll be trying to avoid those as necessary. When it comes to Warrior, most enemies will be fightable to you, but you'll generally start struggling with time management here. Try to pull enemies constantly, reduce the overall downtime by moving around while fighting, and plan what to pull ahead of time. Be quick at locating the exit and making sure the exit room is cleared before the key opens. Utilize your stun and interrupt whenever possible as a form of mitigation. Consider keeping a strength rolling whenever you hit a cap of 3, especially on floors debuffed with gloom or blind. The no ability penalty is the harshest one for you, as it makes your rotation rather scarce and also disables you from using raw intuition, so you lose a good chunk of self-healing. Not every no ability needs a Serenity though, but beware of monster choices on those floors. No item should mostly be fightable for you as long as you can keep raw intuition and other mitigations rolling. If you're struggling for time, consider flighting or strengthening before using a rage, and try to learn landmine strategies for floor sets that will be more frequently featuring landmines. Next, Reaper. You're becoming more of a glass cannon the more the floor sets continue. Before tackling monsters who do tank busters or double auto attacks, you want to make sure your Arcane Crest and Bloodbath are available. Keep potions rolling and using your stun as mitigation as well. If you have box running and aren't capped on Serenity, consider using a Purity before going into the next floor to prevent potentially having to use a Serenity if you get a no item penalty. Sometimes enemy choices will allow you to go through without spending one. You shouldn't have time management issues as you're killing things quickly, but you should learn to utilize stagger kiting to survive better. Essentially, walking in and out of enemy range will allow you to keep some uptime and for monsters to miss out on some auto attacks. Also, you can skip some autos by running behind the enemy and forcing them to turn around. Harp is a strong tool if you need to kite more in some places, so don't forget about it. Necromancer can generally pull at a slower pace, ensuring that it has bursts ready for more difficult enemies, and use the basic abilities on simpler monsters in between. You'll have the most issues on floors with blind and no ability debuffs, as they slow your damage output a lot, meaning you'll be taking more damage from enemies. In these situations, focus more on kiting and use a Serenity if you must, especially if Gloom is also in the mix. Whenever you need to cast spells, get into the habit of stagger kiting, moving just enough out of range for the enemy to stop and attack you, only to not be able to reach you. If you have box running and aren't capped on Serenity, consider using a Purity before going into the next floor to prevent potentially having to use Serenity if you get a no item penalty. Oftentimes, enemy choices will allow you to go through without spending one, especially if you take your time preparing your bursts for the harder hitting mobs. Sleep is a very powerful mitigation tool you have, allowing you to either create up to 30 seconds to heal up and prepare your drawings, or even de-aggro monsters by sleeping them and moving away 2 rooms distance. As a Sage, don't forget Cardia. On many of these floor sets, you'll be multi-pulling to save time, as a healer AoE is a DPS gain on 2 enemies in Palace. The further you go in, the more difficult this becomes to execute without a steal, so your strategy will shift from AoEing to single-pulling enemies, but faster. Reduce the overall downtime by moving around while fighting, and plan what to pull ahead of time. Be quick at locating the exit and making sure the exit room is cleared before the key opens. While no item shouldn't cause you too many issues, no ability debuff is really bad on healers, as it prevents you from using actions that restore your mana. Try to often multi-pull on these floors and wait some time in between pulls or before opening a gold chest to ensure you have enough mana for the next fight. Blind and Gloom can also be time killers for you, so keep an eye on that clock and be ready to use some strengths or flights or even alterations to save time rather than using a rage prematurely.
In some scenarios, Sage's Icarus ability can come handy because on its own it doesn't draw aggro. This means you could dash somewhere by using a side aggro monster that is turned away from you, and this won't pull the enemy.
Hugging the walls from now on is generally safe, except for a few examples covered in the previous chapter. Visibility is also a lot greater than before, so get into the habit of paying attention to your surroundings, checking if any patrols or treasure rooms are on the way, or if you can see the key out on the horizon. Also, from now on, enemies will respawn every 5 minutes. This is very important to keep in mind, as getting a respawn on top of you can be tricky. Try to refer to your chat log occasionally to keep in mind when a respawn might happen. Generally, keep sustaining potions rolling when fighting things here. At this point, you want to start saving commanders more, but also keep in mind that this particular floor set comes with above average amount of floor enchantments. Don't overspend your items, but also prepare that 161 to 170 can be a recovery set for the majority of the jobs. Respect the Palace Pod Gaze mechanic. These are not difficult, but have proximity aggro and you'll be fighting them often. Respect Anubis' Death Door. It hurts a lot and might even one-shot you. It will cast it every few seconds, so keep moving a lot when fighting it. This cast is quick. Devilets are really annoying, as they cast ice spikes, which reflect damage back to you for 5 seconds. Let's wait this out, it hurts. It also casts Void Blizzard right after, which gives you a 20 seconds long slow debuff. It is recommended to either stun, interrupt, or Asuna this, depending on the role, though you can also outrange it if you're quick enough. Casters can interrupt a spell by carefully timing the sleep cast. Soul Flayers are not difficult, but are annoying because they self-heal several times. Archdemons can be dangerous as they are proximity aggro patrols. If you pull one, stay close to avoid its conal, and prepare for paralysis nonsense. Keep potions rolling when fighting one. If you're quick enough and have a stun or a shield on your job, you can cancel the paralysis out. Slowing the Archdemons down with arm's length helps with timing your stun correctly. As a machinist, you can kite everything except for puddings and devilet. You shouldn't need too many sustaining potions on this set, but try to kite as much as possible. This means you can, technically, survive the no item debuff floor without using a Serenity if you have room to kite and appropriate enemies are available. As a warrior, everything here is easy and fightable, but you might start struggling with your time. Consider using a strength or flight on later floors when dealing with a lot of soul flayers and imps. Consider using a Serenity only when you're dealing with multiple debuffs and are low on time. As a Reaper, utilize your shield to deal with Tank Buster from Merilith and the incoming damage from Soul Flayers and Archdemons. Be really careful of mimics. Use your shield, Bloodbath, and keep potion running. Consider using a Serenity when you're dealing with a no item floor debuff, especially if you have Pox running. Beware of blind and no abilities debuff, as well as HP down paired with the gloom, as those can reduce your healing output and put your life in danger. Necromancer can pull at a slower pace, ensuring that it has a burst ready for more difficult enemies, and use the basic abilities on simpler enemies in between. Meriliths, Soul Flayers, and Archdemons are considered to be more dangerous here, so use a full burst on those. Don't forget to use your sleep as a form of mitigation when needed. As a Sage, Gremlins, Deepeyes, Shapties, and Taurus can all easily be pulled in duos without a steal or trios with a steal. Try to use that to your advantage, as they spawn often on earlier floors, potentially creating some time to deal with the harder monsters later in the floor set. Your biggest time wasters on this set will be the floor enchantments, as there can be many of them, as well as Soul Flayers and Imps. They aren't difficult to fight, but they waste your time a lot. Consider using a Strength or Flight if needed to speed up. This boss is the same as the floor 60 boss, except that it hits harder and there are fewer safe areas to get knocked back to. You can use a shield or a knockback immunity to prevent Fostora knockback altogether. After the knockback, you have a few brief moments to adjust if needed. Be really careful, as getting hit by one of these explosions will kill you. Here are some of the ways you can avoid them: getting knocked into a safe area, getting knocked into a tiny space between the orbs, getting knocked across the arena utilizing the space, using knockback immunity. Other than worrying about the explosions, make sure to move as soon as the boss is about to place the purple bleed puddle, as this one hurts a lot. You want to prevent it from doing any additional bleed ticks on you. When the boss sword lights up with the little orbs around it, it's your cue to move. This boss does hit hard, but it cannot crit you. Tanks and healers don't need steal, while it's recommended that DPS jobs use a steal here. If it's your first time here, feel free to use a steal regardless, to reduce the risk of dying and start practicing the next set. Without offensive commanders, this boss can take you about 10 minutes on tanks and healers, 7 on DPS jobs. With a strength, you can do this boss in 8 minutes on tanks and healers, and in about 5 minutes on DPS jobs. As you may be fumbling your rotation sometimes while learning the fight, keep an eye on the clock and use a lust or an additional strength if needed. Good idea is to try and pay attention to how much HP percentage you are doing per 1 minute, and then mathing out whether you have enough time without using any extra commanders. Like the previous set, hugging the walls from now is generally safe, except for a few examples covered in Chapter 5. Get into the habit of paying attention to your surroundings and checking if any patrols are on the way, or if you can see the key out on the horizon. Also, enemies still respawn every 5 minutes. Generally, keep sustaining potions rolling when fighting things here, especially if you cannot kite them. This lore set has, on average, far fewer enchantments than the previous lore set, so it's often considered to be a recovery set. Try to exit this lore set with as many capped commanders as possible. On this floor set, many enemies have proximity aggro, especially towards the end. This can slow you down somewhat, so keep an eye on that clock. Vivers and Triceratops, both proximity, hit quite hard, so always have your potions rolling when fighting them, along with some defensives. Mimics can also now destroy you, so don't open chests while fighting other things, and be careful to keep yourself healthy when fighting one. Remember to kite if needed. Procs, Archaeosaurs, and Mylodons hit hard, but they are side aggro and can be avoided if you have no room to kite them or mitigations ready for them. Vinegaroos or meme dinos can be perpetually stuck in their back conal animation if you move in and out from behind them, which can be really nicely utilized to safely deal with them. Machinists can safely kite everything here, versus Patrol and Mylodon will sometimes hit you with their ice attacks, but this can be easily managed with potions and second wind. With Sprint and Leg Raise, you can avoid most of the incoming damage
during this lore set.
But don't forget to keep your sustains rolling if you don't have a lot of kiting room. Warrior can safely deal with everything here, but the time management might become an issue on later floors due to many proximity enemies. If needed to conserve time, use some flights or alterations in the middle section of the set. Reaper will feel the most damage from the Vivers, Triceps, and Crocs, but you can use Arcane Crest to cancel out their tank busters a lot of the time. Leg Sweep and Arm's Length will be your best friends here, as every enemy other than a Mimic are stunnable and slowable. Consider using a Raising here if you're still not comfortable with mobs here on a melee. Necromancer can safely kite most enemies here. This is the set where you will feel the enemies start hurting you quite a bit if they remain alive long enough to do that. Without pox, no item floors can be safely dealt with a little bit of careful mob choosing. Many enemies on this floor are sleepable, so use that to your advantage to gain time to heal and prepare your abilities. Sage will feel the time management issues in the latter half of the floor set where most enemies are proximity aggro. Consider multipling lindworms and sarcophaguses in the early floors to save time, 2 without steal, 4 with steal when you can. It is better to try and use some flights or alterations for time saving first before opting for a serenity. Many enemies on this floor are sleepable, so use that to your advantage to gain time to heal up and prepare your abilities. This boss is very similar to its level 70 counterpart and can be dealt with in the same way. It's going to be hitting you with a heavy debuff, which will start at 15 seconds length. Each consecutive time it'll last shorter until you spend 2 turns immune to it, before it goes back to 15 seconds. When it hits you with the 15 seconds heavy, use sprint when you still have about 8 seconds of the debuff left and start moving to avoid electrogenesis. When the boss casts Douse, move away about a quarter of the arena to get him away from the haste puddle. Keep moving in circles around the edges of the arena, either clockwise or counterclockwise, and keep your eye on your health. This boss can crit you, so keep your steal up and your sustained potions rolling if on a DPS job. That being said, physical range jobs may have an easier time here with this boss, with some extra kiting and stacking the douse paddles one over another. The entire boss's rotation will last you a full circle around the arena's edge, and walking through the previously placed douse doesn't hurt. If you can pull this off, you can save yourself a steal on this fight as a machinist. DPS jobs can do this boss in under 7 minutes with no strength or lust, or about 5 minutes with strength. Tanks and healers will do this boss for about 11 to 12 minutes without strength, but you also don't require steal, just some extra care. With strength, you can do this in about 8 minutes. As you may be fumbling your rotation sometimes while learning the fight and getting used to boss's rotation, keep an eye on the clock and use a lust to earn additional strength if needed. Steal is also a good idea. A good idea is to try and pay attention to how much HP percentage you're doing per 1 minute, and then mathing out whether you have enough time without using extra commanders. This is where you want to pop a raising in the beginning, regardless of the job you're on. This is also the last set where raisings can drop from a gold chest, but luckily their drop rate is somewhat higher here, so you might get one back by the end of the floor set. This floor set is significantly easier in the first half than in its second half. It is also known for very common landmine traps on the first 3 floors, which some jobs can utilize very well. On this floor set, the wolf is the one enemy that most jobs tend to avoid. It hits hard. It's self-healing and applies a heavy damage over time on you. If you have to fight one, consider using a witching on any job. Tanks can deal with it without steal, but it is a very slow kill due to self-healing, so it's not recommended to pull them. Anzus are considered to be impossible on most jobs, though they are possible on all of our job options with strength and steal and a lot of sustainability. Anzus will open by jumping at the player and stunning them, applying a heavy damage over time and repeating this combo approximately every 15 seconds. It is also reported that the jump stun can pierce tanks' invulnerability, so be careful. As both wolves and Anzus have side aggro, it's best to avoid them when possible. Sasquatches or monkeys are a difficult enemy that is also proximity aggro, so it's likely you'll have to deal with a few. They are luckily stunnable and sleepable, which can be used to get a breather and heal up a bit. Never pull them when they are under their ripe banana buff, which they only apply out of combat, and be extremely careful of the crits. Browbeat is a tank buster they'll do at the beginning of the pull and then approximately every 20 seconds, so if you can, shield it or prepare some heals for when it happens. Wycent Patrol will enrage after 30 seconds by pulling you in, applying heavy debuff, and then using a massive AoE. This is interruptible and sleepable, so be ready when it happens. The no knockback floor debuff cancels the draw-in effect, so you can kite them safely on such floors. Corals are considered as an easier enemy simply because they appear on floors where other monsters are usually worse, but they should be fought with caution. They apply paralysis on you often, which slows you down and makes it harder for you to mitigate damage properly. If you have a steal or are a tank, you can stand in its first conal to get a bit of a shorter paralysis duration for the first time. time. This paralysis has a diminishing returns effect, so pulling several corals in a row is a good idea, because you'll be skipping on some paralysis windows this way. Bears, Dalmels, and Snowclops are generally the easiest enemies on this set. Beware of Snowclops' untelegraphed frontal AoE, Glower, and wide point-blank swing attack. Bandersnatches and Lions hit hard, but can be kited well, as they do no ranged damage. Birds of the Deep Palace are proximity patrols which front-load their damage, mitigate a lot when you first pull them. Once they do Tropical Wind, don't interrupt it. It'll cause the birds to simply start casting many telegraphed AoEs in a row, which are quick and should be respected, but their cast also gives you plenty of time to heal up and do damage back to them. Machinists can deal with most things here relatively easily, provided that you have enough kiting room, but still try to avoid wolves and Anzus. If you must pull these, use a steel or a witching. Most enemies can be heavied with leg raise, and all of them can be slowed with arm's length, so use these abilities to your advantage. Pull Sasquatches only when you have some crowd control abilities and ideally most of your burst ready. It is going to need extra mitigation or healing upon the pull and every 20 or so seconds when he repeats his tank buster. As a warrior, consider spending your sights and witchings on the first 3 floors, which have a higher chance of landmines. I'll cover the landmine play tutorial at the end of chapter 1, and there is also a warrior-specific guide in the description made by Finh, which I recommend you watch. Landmine plays are not mandatory, but they are very useful as they can save you a lot of time in advance for later, slower floors. If you aren't doing this strategy, consider using an early flight if you're sitting at 3 so you don't overcap later. Keep your sustain and raw intuition rolling, and you shouldn't have issues with any specific enemies, though you should have your mitigations ready to potentially fight an Anzu. As a Reaper, note that everything except for the Vicent and Deep Palace Bird is stunnable, so use your leg sweep as a form of mitigation. Arcane Crest is great for Sasquatch and Lion tank busters, which they first use on pull. Pick your targets carefully and don't pull anything when your HP isn't full. You can do decent damage with Harp if you need to do a lot of kiting in some situations to stay alive. As a Pictomancer, note that everything except for the birds is sleepable, so use your sleep as a form of mitigation. You can handle the no item debuff in most cases by doing your burst, hiding while fighting, and sleeping the enemy if necessary to create time for more bursty drawings. Avoid fighting Anzus unless you have strength and steel, and only on no debuff floors. Pull harder enemies less often, but with full burst ready. Consider stealing floors with no ability and or blind debuffs to save serenities, or even raging out if you're low on both. As a sage, consider doing landmine plays on floor 171 to 173 as they have a higher chance for these types of traps. I've covered the landmine play tutorial at the end of chapter 1. If no landmine or no sight, you can use a lust paired with your witching to also quickly finish off a group of 6 to 7 enemies. If no witching, you can do smaller landmine plays with 2 to 3 enemies to speed up time as well. This is not mandatory, but it is very useful as it can save you a lot of time in advance for the later, slower floors. If you aren't doing this strategy, consider using an early flight if you're sitting at 3 so you don't overcap later. Bears and Dalmels can also be multiple in duos or trios, especially with steel rolling. You can deal with Anzus and corals more easily than other jobs as you can assume yourself, but still be careful of their incoming damage. All of the monsters on this set, except for the birds, are sleepable, so use that to your advantage to mitigate or de-aggro monsters when needed. Behemoth, the bane of every Necromancer's existence, except if your progging is a healer. This boss is known to be a prog stopper, and it will likely be your first true challenge here. However, don't despair if it is. Everyone struggles with it, at least briefly. I'll give you tips about its rotation, push strategies for the 5 jobs we've been covering in the guide, as well as some resources you can use to practice with ahead of time. For this boss, you'll want to use a strength, but you should delay it and use it when the boss is at about 80% HP to make sure you have enough of it. DPS can use it sooner. Steel is actually optional, but I suggest using it until you get comfortable with fight. If you had food on before Behemoth, it is not a bad idea to click it off before starting the fight, or if not using a steel, before the start of Meteor Push later in the fight. Behemoth's rotation is very consistent. He'll be alternating trounce between south and north this time, unlike his level 80 counterpart. He will start the fight by doing a Thunderbolt Conal, 2 Charybdises, and then 1 more Thunderbolt Conal before moving to the south to execute execute Trounce. Then he falls into his steady rotation till the end of the fight. When he's moving from south to north, he'll be doing 2 Charybdises, a Thunderbolt, and then a 3rd Charybdis. When he's moving from north to south, he'll be doing a Thunderbolt, 2 Charybdises, and then another Thunderbolt. Manage these around the edges of the arena or his hitbox. Avoid Trounce in between his south and north rotations by staying close to him, and keep your rhythm going until he hits about 32 to 35% health. At this point, you want to start saving your resources. Keep sustaining potions rolling, but use only your basic 1-2-3 combo on any job other than a healer. Healers can keep attacking as you normally would. Simply manage your mana with Lucid Dreaming on cooldown. DPS jobs and tanks want to use the basic combo until Behemoth gets to about 21 to 23% health. At this point, stop attacking, deselect the boss, and get yourself into the right position to use a lust. All of the jobs, except for healers, will want to lust. There are many possible spots for this, but one consistently good one is to use it when Behemoth is on his south to north pattern. As he casts his Thunderbolt on south side, use a sustaining potion. As he casts his 3rd Charybdis, use lust and move slowly towards the north between the casts. Make sure to apply 5 stacks and avoid Trounce. At this point, you can drop the lust and use only your base attack to hack into Behemoth a few times to get him as close as possible to 15% HP. Machinist, Necromancer, and Reaper don't need to be so precise. You can be close to 16%, but Warrior wants to be somewhere between 15.1 to 15.3%. Sage still doesn't care about any of this. It just keeps attacking and managing mana. When you're ready with Behemoth's HP and your sustaining potion is freshly applied, it is gonna be the time to start the burst. Try to time it as Behemoth starts casting a Charybdis, usually the second one on the north or the first one on the south, depending on how long it took you to get him to the right percentage. Don't rush this decision, but also don't wait for too long as your lust stacks will drop. When you start the burst, don't stand in front of Behemoth, as he can sometimes sneak auto attacks between the meteors if you do so. It is safest to stay on his side or away from him. And you can also drop the food buff here for some extra safety in healing up later, as less vitality means less meteor damage. This is optional, unless you're on a free trial and using weaker potions, in which case definitely drop food. So, sustaining potion is ticking, Behemoth is casting Charybdis, and you're moving to his side, starting with the burst in following ways. Machinist will want to start by placing the turret and using Reassemble, following up with Drill and Wildfire as soon as Behemoth starts casting Charybdis. Keep using your burst until the first meteor drops, then use Second Wind and the potion, and continue bursting with all you have. Warrior will first make sure their Storm's Eye buff is active as they start to push. You'll ideally use your AoE skills to set him up for this. When that's the case and the percentage is right, as soon as Behemoth starts casting Charybdis, start attacking. After the first meteor, use Raw Intuition and the Thrill of Battle macro. Keep attacking. After the second meteor, use Home Gang. Keep attacking. After the third meteor, use Equilibrium and Potion and Raw Intuition as backup when it comes up of cooldown. If you're on a free trial and not using the better potions, this Raw Intuition will be needed. Keep attacking to kill him. Pictomancer will first make sure they are in subtractive palette mode. They'll want to start the push with the Tincture of Intelligence right as Behemoth is casting the first Charybdis, and then immediately following up with a burst during his cast of second Charybdis. Depending on the server ticks, you might be able to kill him before the first meteor drops or shortly after. You do not need to worry about healing, simply burst him. Reaper will want to start bursting as Behemoth is casting his Charybdis and use Bloodbath and Second Wind after the first meteor. Bloodbath will still remain active after the second meteor, at which point you also want to weave in a potion if needed. You can put Arcane Crest anywhere, just note that meteor is falling for 10 seconds and your shield only lasts for 5, so don't use it too early. Frankly, you don't even need the shield as long as you keep doing damage, it's just something extra in case you panic. Sage, or any healer for that matter, doesn't need to worry about the 15% push or applying lust as mentioned. Just give yourself plenty of space between Behemoth and yourself when he starts casting meteors, and make sure to heal up above 80% HP between each meteor. Manage your mana with lucid dreaming and use strength only if you're running out of time. For practice, you can use a dummy next to Idleshire, which syncs your abilities to level 60. Pretend that the dummy is a Behemoth and move around as you would during his rotation. It is important to practice the muscle memory for when you open the push, as the biggest challenge of Behemoth fight will eventually be the adrenaline. Your nerves might make it so you don't think as clearly, so getting your rotation ready ahead of time will help you do this correctly without much thinking. Also, while the general idea of each Behemoth push remains the same patch after patch, some minor changes might happen to your rotation, depending on job changes, new potions, or other things added with time. I highly recommend checking out the Solo Deep Dungeon Discord, linked in the description, to find out about the latest push advice at the time when you decide to run Behemoth on any of the jobs. Best of luck! Don't forget to pop a raising at the beginning, regardless of the job you're on. So what you have is what you've got, be careful. If you only have one raising, use it on this set rather than the next one, as it is more dangerous. Generally, keep sustaining potions rolling when fighting any enemies here. This is regarded to be the hardest set of all of the Palace sets by many players, and it might take you a few attempts to clear it. The challenge here is to spend enough items to get through, but still keep enough for the last set to be possible to clear. Floors 187, 188, and 189 are crawling with absolutely horrible enemies. You'll have a hard time picking what to fight here on a DPS or healers, but this is also very close towards the end, so it is recommended to use up some rages and flights to help you. You were saving those commanders for this set and the next one. Generally, the common strategy is to fight the first 3 floors normally. A lot of players propose using a flight on floor 181 to make 182 faster if you're sitting at 3 flights. Also, if you're lacking a lot of commanders, use up your fortunes and affluences early and try to fish out some steals to help you fight. If you're capped on many items, then save those fortunes and affluences for later to not risk overcapping too much. Alterations are best used from floors 184 to 186 to reduce the amount of other horrible enemies. Mimics are often easier to fight and can drop chests more often. Common plan is to use a rage on 189, and sometimes you can plan to double dip this rage from 188 to 189. A lot of people also like to flight 189 to reduce the overall amount of enemies they need to fight, especially if double dipping. While these tips are relatively commonly advised, remember that there is no recipe for clearing Palace. You'll need to adjust to your circumstances. Keep in mind that you should keep 7 to 8 minutes for the boss on DPS jobs and about 8 to 10 on tanks and healers. Also, try to keep all of your 3 lusts for the boss, if possible, and a strength and steel combo. For the first time, it is even advised to have 2 steals ready in case you're fumbling the rotation a bit so the boss takes longer than 8 minutes. You really don't want to do this fight without a steal. On this floor set, easier enemies are bombs, Vamora patrols, Vinthor's patrols, and Garms or chimeras. Keep in mind that these should all be single pulled, especially the Vamora patrols, which heal their allies if pulled with something else. Garm is doing a lot of casts, making it easier to manage health, but it can be scary because you need to pay attention to its proximity aggro and the dragon in, ram run mechanic. It also has significantly more HP than other enemies, so fighting many chimeras can be detrimental to your time management. If you have many of them roaming around, consider either raging them or using a strength and fighting them quicker, if you have enough room to not get overburdened by them. Generally speaking, flood dragons are not to be messed with. Healers can deal with them a bit easier because they can assuna the damage over time it gives, or shield to avoid getting the dot in the first place, but they still hit like a truck. If at all possible, avoid flood dragons on all of the DPS jobs, and use a witching if you accidentally pull one. Warriors can deal with them if they must, with their defensive cooldowns active, potion rolling, and a steal. Sprites and Bamora Campas are long-range casters, so kiting doesn't mitigate much of their damage. Pull these only when you have full defensives and full burst cooldowns ready on DPS jobs. With steel, they are a lot more manageable. Crawlers, worms, and scorpions are considered to be harder enemies on this floor set and recommended to be generally avoided. Crawlers and worms have sound aggro type, but worms will damage you out of combat, so be careful when fighting other enemies near them. Worms cast in rage after 30 seconds, drawing you in and then instantly using a point-blank AoE which will likely kill you. This draw-in effect can be negated by using a shield, a donut room layout, a stun, or a no knockback floor debuff. The knockback immunity, such as surecast, doesn't work. The tricky part is to time your shield or wall block well in case you don't have a 30-second dodge to help you keep track of the timing. Consider popping a sustaining potion immediately at pull to use its timer as a reference if you ever need to fight one of these. Crawlers are truly best avoided. Their poison damage is very difficult to negate, especially with the slow debuff they also induce. Healers can fight them, but they waste so much of their time that they often aren't worth the trouble. Scorpions will constantly draw you in and tank buster you, so unless the floor has a no knockback debuff, use a steal if you plan to fight one as a DPS, and be ready with your burst and defensive cooldowns. With the no knockback penalty, they are a lot easier to deal with on any job as they can safely be kited around. They apply slow debuff on you with tail screw ability, which can be stunned with proper timing. Machinist wants to avoid flood dragons and crawlers and be careful with sprites as they can't be kited around. Sprites can be done with no steal if your burst is ready, but use a steal if you need to fight during any debuff conditions. All of the enemies on this floor set, except for chimeras, can be heavied, so use leg graze often to help you kite. If you don't have an abundance of kiting room, don't hesitate to remove the no item penalty from the floor, and don't hesitate to use alterations on later floors as mimics are a lot easier to deal with than most of the other monsters. If you've met with a horrible debuff combo, consider spending 1 to 2 rages on this floor set rather than steel or serenity. Warriors won't have major issues killing most monsters, but your main concern will be time management. Consider using a flight for 182 and 189 floors, if not more. Consider pairing a flight with strength on 182 so you can kill things even faster. Your time-saving plan would mostly consist of alternating flights and alterations, as well as using strengths and pulling really quickly. Count on potentially using 1 rage this floor set, ideally to combat a nasty floor without having to serenity, or 189 as it is often crawling with Garm patrols. Generally, crawlers are the worst enemy you can fight, and you want to have plenty of defenses for the flood dragons. Floors 187 to 189 are known to have a higher chance of landmines, so you can consider some more landmine plays if you've still got some sights and witchings at this point. Reapers want to avoid flood dragons and crawlers and only pull scorpions and worms if they have a steal active. You are a true glass cannon here, oftentimes in a race with the enemy of who will kill each other first. If you have a steal running, you can deal with a worm by carefully timing the stun immediately after it draws you in for the enrage. Kite and use your dash and range attacks to put space between you and the enemies when you don't have any defensive cooldowns or potions to roll. Necromancers want to avoid flood dragons and crawlers and only engage with worms and scorpions when their DPS burst is fully prepared. You could burst a flood dragon with strength and full burst prepared, but this can be risky, so I advise it only in emergencies. You are a glass cannon here, so try to do whatever you can not to let enemies auto attack you too often. If you're met with a horrible debuff combo, consider spending 1 to 2 rages on this floor set rather than steel or serenity. Sages have a relatively easy time fighting here, as they can assume the flood dragon and even the crawler damage over times, and they can shield from worms and rage with proper timing. But they will be struggling with time management. You cannot do many multiples here, generally single pull, unless you have steel active. With steel, you can manage 2 grenades, sprites, or vinters. Consider flighting 182 and 189 and count on using at least 1 rage on this set, preferably to avoid dealing with a nasty debuff combination. Also, ensure you have at least 10 minutes for the boss and ideally 2 steals as backup. With 3 lusts, you can do this boss in under 8 minutes with proper rotation management, but it is the most difficult fight you'll encounter as a healer, so it is not uncommon to go over that time while you're still learning. While technically you can survive the boss without a steal, you are at the mercy of RNG and getting crit will end your life. Don't risk it. This boss, it's like a truck, and it is a proper final boss of this dungeon. And yes, this is the final boss. The next floor set has no bosses anymore. Godfather has a very similar rotation to Godmother on floor 90, except that the bomb colors are reversed. It is worth knowing that the bombs always spawn in the exact predetermined locations, so we often use this chart to plan out how to deal with the boss. To make things easier, you can mark the arena by placing 2 markers like this. The first 3 bombs will be closer to the A marker, and the next 3 bombs will be closer to the B marker. The next one is in the middle, and this is where the boss will usually die on most jobs. If you are a melee, you can choose to place markers a bit more precisely, like this. Placing the boss exactly on these markers for the first 5 bombs will give you free space to stay in range and unleash your full burst, not having to adjust for any bomb positions. No matter the job, you need steel and strength for this boss. Having 3 lusts will be extremely useful, but if you have less, you'll use what you have and potentially have to pop another steel towards the end. None of the jobs covered in this guide should need a second steel, even with 1 lust to be fair, but since you may not be executing the boss placement rotation well enough while you're getting used to it, it is better to count on some extra safety. When you first spool, prepare for the boss to open with a tank buster, so never lust at the very beginning. Kite, heal up, and prepare for a blue bomb spawn north. When the blue bomb spawns, kill it and be careful to avoid the small bombs scattered across the arena. You can lust here to kill the bomb with it, but that requires careful positioning, so in my opinion it is better to just kill the bomb normally. After it's dead, pop a sustaining potion and lust, and apply 5 stacks of it to the boss, then get out of lust. It's going to be using a few circle AoEs at this point, called sap, allowing you some time to breathe during the lust window, but if your HP feels low, drop out of the lust sooner. After the 3 saps, you'll do a tank buster and then another sap, so prepare for some kiting when you get out of that lust. For that last sap, try to position close to your marker and let the boss come to you right as the orange bomb spawns. If the orange bomb is close enough to touch the boss's hitbox, this is ideal. Just be very careful not to AoE and accidentally push the bomb away. No ricochet on Machinist, no doses on Sage, no hammer time on Picto, etc. Use this time to DPS the boss down, and if you're on a Picto, use this time to draw your canvases anew. If the bomb needs adjusting, do it as soon as possible. Best to use an auto attack when you stand behind it. Be careful of small blue bombs while doing this. Technically, you can survive the massive burst if you fully miss out on adjusting the bomb by standing very far away from the boss and healing as soon as you can when the freeze falls off. Healers sometimes use this strategy, but for other jobs it is not recommended, as the boss then restarts his rotation with a quick tank buster incoming. Each time after you kill the blue bomb, use lust to refresh the stacks, and then keep following the markers, keeping yourself alive between the bursts. DPS jobs will need about 6 minutes with 3 lusts and a strength. Warrior will need about 7 minutes with 3 lusts and a strength. Sage will need about 8 minutes with 3 lusts and a strength. If you only have 2 lusts, add an additional minute to this. If your steel falls off, consider popping another one, as the boss can crit you and it is extremely dangerous to try him without a steel. Don't forget to pop a raising at the beginning, regardless of the job you're on. Generally, keep sustaining potions rolling when fighting any enemies here. This floor set is the very last one, so be ready to use all the rest of the palm enders you've got. No need to save them too much anymore, but try to spread them over the course of the set. There is no boss, so there is a bit of extra time to handle the regular floors. However, the kill count needed to open the key can go up to 13 here. This means that if you are very unlucky, even a flighted floor can take 7 kills. Oftentimes, early floors take a lot longer than the later floors here due to the usage of resolutions later on. Make sure that you have at least 1 minute to walk the final walk on floor 200 so you're able to touch down on the clear achievement before timing out. The no item debuff can be detrimental to jobs with low sustainability, but as usual, combinations of gloom, blind, and no ability can be extremely bad as well. The floors 197 to 199 can have a no item debuff, but they cannot have the no knockback debuff. So if you're running low on serenities but have a rage, you can use your last rage on the floor 198 key to bring it to 199 and to bump up your chances of winning. You can also do this double dip with a resolution, of course, though rage tends to be easier to manage time with. Commonly, you'll want to use up your fortunes and affluences early to fish out as many chests as possible. Don't do this only if you're capped on all of the useful items, in which case use them when you spend a few items first. first. If you are at 2 to 3 strength or steel, use one of each and keep pulling quickly. It is a good idea to keep one combo of strength steel for the very last 3 floors just to have a backup during your resolution plays. You'll kill enemies quicker and survive potential hits easier. Every other strength or steel you can use earlier, though try to aim to use them on the floors you are actively fighting. If you don't have strength or steel actively ticking, you can take more time thinking and planning. Try to use alterations between floors 194 to 196, as even mimics can be easier to deal with than other enemies here. However, keep one purity, which you can use right before you start using resolutions on the last 3 floors. On floors 197 to 199, ideally spend your resolutions and don't open any more chests, as mimics with a pox can make your job a lot harder. Try to keep one rage or resolution for 199 in case you have no serenities for it. Otherwise, use rage on a nasty dual debuff floors as you see fit. Don't forget to use up those safeties and sights to help you navigate floors faster now. Treasure rooms tend to appear more commonly up here, so make sure to scout the key ahead as early as possible. If you're dealing with a treasure room on the way to the key, think if you can carve some sort of a path to the key by fighting proximity monsters first. If the only solution is to rage or resolution out, consider popping a witching first to make this significantly safer. Sometimes, if you simply need to pass through a horrible room to the exit that's normally not guarded, a sacrifice can be a worthwhile strategy. With raising on, run through the room, don't apply any damage over time to the enemies, and try to die as close as possible to the key. Once you're killed, monsters will go back to their place, allowing you to leave. On this floor set, many enemies are of the undead status, meaning resolutions you probably have piled upon will be really useful. Undead mostly show up on floors 197 to 199, but corpse patrols early on are also considered undead, as well as the mummies. Mummies are simple to deal with normally, but if you have several corpse patrols roaming around, consider using a resolution for them early. If you're dealing with an early floor nasty debuffs and have a lot of mummies and corpses around, using a resolution can help you save a serenity and a steel, which is always good. When using a resolution, note that only wraiths, gourmands, horse patrols, and mummies can be stunned with it. Onyx dragons, bicephalus, keepers, and knights are not stunnable. If the enemy is stunnable, you can kill them by hitting the same place 3 times quickly in succession. If the enemy is not stunnable, you need to adjust your targeting for the enemy's movement after the first hit. It can be worth having a steel active when you're using resolution in case the non-stunnable enemies reach you and interrupt you with a hit or 2. Arimans are patrols that show up on floors 194 to 197 and are sadly not undead. They are ranged casters and can be difficult to deal with without any defensives. If there aren't too many of them, consider avoiding them, but if you have several of them roaming around, consider popping a steel and fighting them from melee range. Never kite them, as they'll keep auto-attacking you from long range and overwhelm you. Don't forget to respect the level 5 death mechanic by moving behind them. Keepers are patrols showing up on floors 197 to 199, and they hit extremely hard. They are sound aggro, so they can often be avoided, but be careful when you have a bunch of them roaming around near rooms with wraiths. Wraiths do these out of combat AoEs that you need to move away from quickly, so it's worth getting rid of the wraiths first so you can move around more easily. Thankfully, they are one of the easier enemies on the floor. If you're planning to use a resolution and there are many wraiths and keepers around, focus the wraiths down first and consider using a witching before resolution to reduce the risk of dying and to speed up the process. Generally, mummies, traps, wraiths, and onyx dragons are considered to be the easier enemies. All of these monsters have the same mechanics as their earlier counterparts, they just happen faster, so respect them a lot. For traps, either fully kite them or stay in max melee range. Max melee range will force them to use this conal attack, which gives you some breathing room to heal up if necessary. Horses, bicephalus, knights, and gourmands are considered difficult, heavy-hitting enemies for which you want to have a steel ready. Hippogriffs and arimans are somewhere midway, but be careful with these when they are gloom or low HP debuff on the floor and roll your defensives appropriately. Machinist is very squishy here, but kiting most enemies is possible, so take advantage of that. Arimans will be your biggest issue if there are many of them around, as they are not kiteable, so consider using alterations on floors 194 to 197 to replace some Arimans with mimics or korrigans. Avoid keepers at all costs, and use a witching if you pull one. Warrior and Sage won't have any issue fighting anything here, but time management is very important. Keep pulling quickly, finding exits early, and try to keep your strength rolling whenever possible. Knights and Keepers will still pack a punch, so beware of them, especially during HP down and gloom floors. It often pays off to use strengths and flights early to fight as quickly as possible, and then use your rages and resolutions later down the line. Don't panic if the time feels skewed negatively here at first, just think about how you're gonna spread your items to cover as many floors as possible. Necromancer and Reaper are very squishy here, so you're relying on having your bursts and defensive cooldowns ready for the majority of the enemies. Time shouldn't be an issue, but debuffs such as no ability and blind might be, so try to save your rages and steals for floors when you need some help managing debuffs. Avoid Keepers at all costs, use a witching if you pull one. Other than this, same logic applies as till now. Pull harder enemies only with full burst and defensives ready, and pull easier enemies in the meantime. Try to have a steal ready for your resolution plays and rage plays if possible, just for extra safety. This boss is a cozy walk to the end of the pathway and touching the glass pumpkin or firecrest, or a hectic sprint in case you're running out of time. There's also a bench for you to rest after the difficult climb you've had. Congratulations! You can use the / title set, the Necromancer macro, to immediately set your title inside, for screenshot reasons, of course. These days, the Deep Dungeon community has many resources to study from, and for all of the different jobs available in the game. I highly recommend checking on some of these wonderful people listed here and watching their full runs to get a better idea of how one can manage time and resources inside. This content wouldn't be as fun as it is without the community putting their heads together and sharing useful information, so I highly recommend checking out some of those players from the description. I certainly owe some of my own clears to their tips and expertise. Remember, there is no recipe for a successful Palace of the Dead run, but the more you practice, the more you start recognizing patterns and situations that can be helpful to you. I especially recommend the DDCompendium website for a textual overview of all of the floors, boss mechanics, and some other goodies that can be helpful. Also, I highly recommend the Solo Deep Dungeon Discord, where you'll find a bunch of linked resources and many passionate people to help answer questions you have from your runs. Both are linked below. I wish you all the best of luck on your journey through Palace, and if you happen to be looking for other Deep Dungeon guides, find them on my channel.